Yeah, so people online, Instagram, talk about moving abroad like it's a clean escape, especially in reference to like leaving America. And of course, I know America has its share of craziness, right? But there's this idea that you can just leave and everything is just going to magically get better. And I don't fully agree. I just don't. I don't agree because I've lived in 4 countries, and here's the truth. Some parts are way easier than you think, and some parts will humble you real quick, especially in Asia. So, in this video, I'm going to break down what I have found to be easy, what's hard, and what nobody tells you so you can feel calm and prepared instead of anxious. So, I'm having this experience right now. If you've been watching my videos, you know that I have recently moved to Hong Kong and I have been living abroad for 11 years. Okay. So I'm not new to this, right? But every time you move, you become a beginner again. So I'm just going to tell you that I'm a beginner again. And I've worked in China, I've worked in Shanghai. It's totally different. So and of course, like I say this, even when my family comes to visit me, living somewhere and visiting somewhere are totally two different things. So even if you may have visited, it's a different thing. And I know it might seem obvious, but trust and believe. And oftentimes it's even debatable of how long does one consider themselves living in a place, right? Is it 6 months? Is it 5 months? But I'm not gonna here to nitpick. But this is the part that I will say that's easier. Um, Firstly, if you're moving to a country because you were hired, in my case, I'm an educator. So if you are working for a company and they're sending you there, generally the process to getting to the country, they're the person that starts off your paperwork with your visa. They do a lot of your clerical work before you get there. So when you land into the country, you already are starting, you're not starting at zero because they are starting with your paperwork. So, and being in a country on a work visa is totally different from being on a tourist visa. So I will say that it's very easy, um, or easier when you're hired by a company because they are going to do some of the lifting for you. And depending on how amazing your country is, as your company is, will then determine the level of comfort that they offer for you. So that would be one from the logistical standpoint. Um, and I would say that it's easier to reinvent yourself in a new space. Because if you don't know anyone, then you can literally become whoever you want quicker. So that is definitely one of the things that I find to be very easy. Um, I also think that you can meet community faster. I find it sometimes can be easy if you are going to a place for a job. It's quicker to meet people at your job. Doesn't mean they have to be your bestie, but you already start off having some type of social acquaintances, people to go and have a coffee with and chat, which is far different. Like if you are going to a place and you are a nomad or you are just going to a place to set up for a bit. Another thing that I found to be easy, spending can get very clean because you have now prepped yourself before you went to the country. You have an idea of the cost, the lifestyle. So there's certain conscious choices that you can make. Um, yeah, so I would say that that is actually easier. And also I would say daily life, once you find a rhythm, can actually be really, really easy. So these are some of the things that I definitely would say. And I would say one thing I want to say is my quick disclaimer is that Asia is not one experience. Depending on the country, the systems can be totally different. So, for example, I lived in the UAE. When I lived in the UAE, I felt like crème of the crème. I was staying in a five-star hotel for about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. I did all my paperwork, my visa, everything was sorted while I was waiting there. And then they gave me housing. Okay, so I didn't have to do a lot prior to coming. So I felt like I was relaxed into my setting. Same thing when I was working in Shanghai, China. I got there and I had already selected my housing before I left China. And everything was sorted. One thing I will also mention is that when you work for a company, generally they take care of your flight allowance or whatnot. So I was sent my flight and then I just was able to just go there. Okay. So in those instances, and each country is different. When I was in Thailand, it was a little bit more challenging, I would say. Um, but same thing. And one thing I will say that if you're moving to a country for a job, most countries will determine your salary. I know this kind of somewhat related to what we're talking about. But if you're in the country when you are hired, you are now a local hire, which would then mean that you are going to be paid differently than if, let's say, you were international hire. So that is also something to think about. And sometimes there's more perks, not sometimes, there's always more perks if you're international hire. So that's something to think about. I'm giving general tips. But of course, if you want me to expand on a country that I've lived in, I'm happy to do that. Now, let me tell you about the part that's hard. So, even if you're going to a country and your job is paying for certain things, there's going to be other things that you will be responsible. So, for example, here in Hong Kong, I have to get a Hong Kong ID, right? And you can only apply for it once you land in the country, right? You have a certain amount of time, you have to make a appointment, and then you have to do that. Now, the part that can be really hard is that there are many things that you cannot do by, or oftentimes maybe get a discount if you don't have this ID. So case in point, like my ID appointment is in March. So that means there are certain things that I may have to wait. So that can be annoying, if you will, right? Like I understand what it's for. I understand that it's important, but this might be annoying because I'm recording in January, right? So that's something that you need to understand. When I was also in the UAE, there was an Emirates ID. When I was in Thailand, there wasn't an ID. Okay, so it's good to know like what are these like daily things that you need. Of course, appointments and admin. There's a lot of process heavy and like appointment based things that for the most part are always urgent. Like people will say you need to do it like yesterday. And oftentimes these things that you need to do, you could only do them when you're in the country. Of the countries that I lived in, I would say that Thailand was the most challenging when it came to um paperwork. And not because of the country, just the paperwork process, their immigration process. So that part can be quite frustrating because you want to make sure that you have the correct documents and things of that nature because you don't want to be deported out of a country. You don't want to overstay a visa. So those are also important. And also knowing that if you're hired for a job, you want to make sure that you have a work visa when you are hired. Sometimes a country might try to ask you to come in on a tourist visa, and you are technically in most countries, at least the ones that I've worked in so far, you cannot work under a tourist visa. So that is something that can be really cumbersome. It can be very annoying. It can be taxing, especially when someone's telling you you need to come tomorrow to this appointment and you didn't know. So especially, let's say if you're from America like myself, right, where you are used to a certain system, you have to understand that every time you go to a new country, it's a new system. And sometimes if you even a different company that you work for, it's a different system, right? So you have to have some patience because that part can get really tricky. And it can make you just like, there's moments when you just have to take lots of deep breaths, right? Because it's just like it could be annoying. Um, one of the other things I know it feels so obvious, but language barriers. Sometimes, even when I meet people who speak English and haven't had experience working in a language center, most times people know English just to communicate the basics. They cannot go and maybe explain something to you in the way that maybe you want to understand. And then sometimes it may come off as being short. Sometimes it could come off as like they don't care, but understanding and having time abroad, oftentimes, I would say half and half, right? I think sometimes it's just they don't have all the language. And like if you don't have the language, you have two people who don't have the language, and it can feel frustrating if you're talking to someone and it can appear that someone is rude. I know, being from America and being in a culture that we use a lot of pleasantries, a lot of please, a lot of thank yous. In certain cultures, especially when someone's just trying to get their point across, it may not always land that way. And I think that part can be hard because it's easy naturally as a human being to take it personal, right? It's like it is really is normal. Um, so I think this really, really important. Like some rule, and then also rules. Certain countries have in Asia have certain rules that you have to abide by. So, for example, I signed a lease here in Hong Kong. I have to do 1 year. Like that is on the terms and conditions. So you can sign a 2-year lease, but you must stay for 1 year. Okay, so that was something that I had to really understand. In Thailand, for example, if you enter on a tourist visa, you can't work on that. So, that would mean you have to do a visa run, which means you have to exit the country and then come back in. So that, and the hard part is always culture shock. So as I mentioned, politeness, conflict, tones are just different. That's one of the biggest things I've learned just across Asia. Um, and I say that because you should definitely take time to know the culture and the of the place that you're going to or living in, because with everything that's happening in America, sometimes we may categorize something as one thing, but it's not always that case. Sometimes it's just some of the cultural norms. Um, And also, I'm not giving anyone legal advice or visa rule advice. I'm just sharing some things that you should research early. Know your bandwidth, for sure. Know your bandwidth, and know that it is just a process, and you're not the only one that has to go through this process when you're entering the country. And of course, I put like an asterisk. Yes, every passport has certain roles or certain expectations for certain countries. That is not my expertise. I'm speaking as an American. So you should also just know that beforehand. That way that you are prepared and you're not like annoyed. Um, and I would also say what's also hard is like how much money you may have to put up. Here in Hong Kong, for example, putting up 2 months rent plus a month of rent. So if you're moving somewhere to settle or be for a while, like how much money you might have to put up front that you're not maybe prepared for, or I guess not prepared for, right? So just I would say to make sure, and then having certain accounts that you can use in certain countries as well, especially in a case like that where you're taking out money. Now, here's what nobody also tells you. People don't understand that if you don't get clear on the kind of environment you actually need, you can move abroad and you can still feel stressed, just in a different country. So I'm a big proponent of clarity first, location second. Like you need to have some type of clarity. So if you are rebuilding, after reset, subscribe. That's what this channel is for. And comment something easy. Comment easy if you want a part two, with a simple do first action list, or comment with hard if you want part two on the emotional side, which is me expanding on culture shock, loneliness, and starting over. Just let me know what you want to hear more of, and I'm so more than happy to expand on it. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you again.